Hey, another truth. I'm glad you found that video touching. It was something that had been rolling around in my head for a long time. Yesterday, I was just dinged out with asthma, and I wanted to say that more than anything else to Carolyn Ironwheel because I like her. I enjoy her content. I just was thrown by that, so I went off the deep end into a long examination of tarot. I cut my hair, you guys. I cut 6 inches off last night because it had gotten kind of gnarly on the bottom. So it was time. It was time. So, hey, Celine, there are a lot of things I wanted to talk about today because this is going to be one of those ones that I think that is this is something I just have to say. Last week when I did a, shoot, spilling stuff, that's typical me. I was having granola right before I came on because I have to coat my stomach before taking my medications. As you well know, I'm struggling with asthma right now. I'm better today. I'm not 100%. Who knows how long it'll take? Who cares? It's some boring stuff there. So anyway, I get bored of talking about it. I wanted to start by telling you a little story about, I used to have a hobby that I absolutely adored, but nobody else in the family liked it for a couple of reasons. My kids told me, they said, I wish you'd stop that. My husband said, dang, this is an expensive hobby. Maybe you need to not do this anymore. I finally gave it up when my lung doctor said, what, are you crazy? Because what was my hobby? I used to do stained glass for some years. And I loved it. I love doing stained glass. I love making something you stick in the window and the light comes through and it's just wonderful. You can make all these crazy things. I had taken some stained glass lessons when I was in college. Years later, I ran into a friend who did it, who did a very quick tutorial, and he taught it to me. What does it have to do with today? Well, a couple different things. It finally dawned on me that the reason my family did not like me doing stained glass is because of the embarrassment factor. There were times when I'd go pick my kids up from school and I'd been doing stained glass and I'd just throw shoes on and go. And my kids would say, look at you, Mom, you're ridiculous, because I would have two different shoes on. Sometimes they would have glass embedded in them. I've been known to cut myself and be bleeding all down my leg and various things. So if you were doing stained glass on a regular basis, you're burning yourself, cutting yourself, all that. So you started looking like a survivor of Mad Max Thunderdome when you came out sometimes. And my preteen kids did not like that. They said, Mom, normal moms, blah, blah, blah. Well, I guess I wasn't a normal mom, but it reminds me of these guys that I'm going to talk about today. Like I said, the theology exposed by the Rigeteous Gemstones. I said it last week. I'm going to say it again. The creator, Danny McBride, is my book. He's kind of a genius. He's taken all these extremely toxic things about Evangelical Christianity, and he is sending them up in the funniest ways possible. This week, the embarrassing thing that if my kids were seeing me do this, they would run around and scream, Mom, you're embarrassing us again, is Kelvin Gemstones, The God Squad. This episode had more and more about his little, as his father called it, his muscle guys, his little muscle guys. He flipped out and said, they're muscle men, Daddy. Well, one of the things that I've noticed with guys like Matt Walsh and others, and Matt Walsh was on the Dr. Phil show yesterday, and I watched. I catch maybe 1 out of every 10 or 11 Dr. Phil shows. I catch way more Dr. Phil when I got asthma going on than when I don't, and if there's no Law and Order or SVU on. So I was sitting there horrified yesterday. It started out as a good segment. I laughed because I really enjoyed when he was talking to the transgendered people about the pronouns they preferred. You know, he, he, him, she, her, they, them. those sort of, and then other ones like Zay and just a whole laundry list of them. And I was glad to see that address because I don't think that very many people understand that out there in white Christian community, the kind of people that Dr. Phil reaches. They're not the most sophisticated people in the world. I'm just going to call it out. So I was glad to see that yesterday. Then Matt Walsh shows up and makes it all about toxic gender roles. I'm just going to come right out and say it. I used to argue, fuss, and fight with Matt Walsh back when I used to write No Longer Quivering. The time he was a callow 20-something that seemed to have zero life experience, but was running around writing articles like why Jesus wants you to be confrontational and say bad words to people. Just stuff. It's like, dude, get a grip. There's no way. There's no way. No way. And he would still do these things. I just heard cat somewhere. Got ADD big time. So he was saying all these just really horrendous things about people. And I could see he was just not, he was a homeschooled kid who had been raised in the like a veal in a box, who was double downing on the box. But here's the thing with Matt Walsh, his book he was reading yesterday, he was reading his children's book. I was going to pull it up because there is a clip online of Matt Walsh reading this damn book to kids. Basically, the book is called Johnny is a Walrus. And it's about a little boy that decides he's a walrus. Well, and he takes it to the ridiculous extremes, conflating a child deciding they want to be a walrus with someone deciding that genderless pronouns work for them better than gendered pronouns. And I thought some of the people on the panel, the experts, did a pretty good job of pushing back at Matt Walsh when he started to try to say that gender conflation is exactly the same as Johnny deciding to be a walrus. Hell, when I was a kid, and later when I was a teenager, I really wish it could be true. I wanted to be a mermaid. Am I a mermaid at 61? No, sadly enough, but I can pretend I am sometimes without harming anybody else. And get in the pool and swim like a crazy thing and pretend I'm a mermaid, if that floats your boat. So Matt's story doesn't hold up. But it is indicative of one thing, and of the whole Calvin Gemstones God squad. Little muscle guys, his father said. In that branch of evangelical Christianity, being gay is the worst thing you can be. It's the most threatening thing. So you find the Matt Walshes of this world, and not just the Matt Walshes. You find guys like Tim Bailey, who's a big one for this, Doug Wilson. So many of these guys are so afraid of being thought of as gay that they take masculinity in the weirdest ways it was never meant to go. And they're constantly screeching out how masculine and anti-ungay they are, until you start to think it looks about as gay as in this episode. It looks just like it might be homosexuality as much as it looked like when Kelvin and Keith were standing in his closet during this episode, and he took off his underwear and handed it to Keith. And you could just see Keith's naked lust, and that it was just weird, and the both of them were feeling stuff, and they're in the closet literally. And you're looking at the muscle man, you're looking at last season, where you started to wonder if Kelvin was in the closet gay. It was just like, oh my goodness, could it be any clearer? There's nothing wrong with having alternative sexuality, with being gay or whatever. The heart can't help what the heart wants. I'm a big believer in that. And I'm not going to throw rocks at anybody else because they have a different sexuality than I do. I'm secure enough in my own sexuality where that's not even a thing. But apparently these guys aren't, because they just go over the top every single time with their bashing on anything they think might be slightly feminine, that some man might possibly put powder on his face or use face cream or do something like to crochet, which makes me laugh when I hear they don't want men doing any kind of needlework, because back in the olden days when men were men and women were women, only men were allowed to crochet and knit. They had huge guilds throughout what is now the UK. And it was only men. They'd make these giant nets and sweaters and various things that needed to be done. And this was their profession. Damn, I missed my profession by several hundred years, but I would have had to be a guy too. So I don't know about that. I am heterosis. It just is what it is. So they're so busy bashing anything that they think is not masculine that they don't understand that makes them come off a certain way to the rest of us, the world, going, he is so concerned about not appearing weak, wimpy, feminized, that he's become almost a parody of what sexuality is supposed to be. And it can be taken in some really weird ways. All you have to do is look at the writings of one Larry Solomon. Not his real name. I know his real name, but I'm not going to expose it. One Larry Solomon of Biblical Gender Roles. He says the most offensive things. He tries to make out that masculinity is, such as he thinks that men should be allowed to have multiple wives because it was in the Bible. A lot of crazy things are in the Bible. There's even a part, I think it was in one of the earlier books of the Bible, where it talked about some great battle and the men were trapped in a temple and they started to use the altar as a lavatory. So there's all kinds of crazy things in the Bible. So if I wanted to pull out and cherry pick a bunch of really crazy things, I would do that to justify whatever it is that I want to justify. I certainly would not let that stand in my way if I was that insanely focused on sexuality, which I am not. I could care less about that. That's everybody's business. What happens in your bedroom is what happens in your bedroom, and it has nothing to do with me, is the way I've looked at it. So Tim Bailey wrote huge books about this. Doug Wilson talks about this in every one of his books, even though Doug certainly does not personify any of the masculine characteristics that he keeps talking about. What's so funny about it with Doug is that you can look at him and see what he's like. I mean, see what his physical is like. And what he describes is so masculine. It's like I'm looking at Kelvin Gemstone, questioning his own sexuality, so doubling down on the masculine part of it. Yeah, that, which is really silly. And that goes back to the whole modesty thing too that I was talking about last week. Yeah, I got some pushback on that. Not a lot, but that hit some people who said, "What are you doing?" Well, I'm using a piece of popular culture that I'm watching right now to springboard into discussions, because it is one of the best depictions of some of these very harmful things that are going on in these non-denominational evangelical churches. Now, let me say, it's not all churches that this is going on in, because clearly it's not. If it was all churches, then we'd really be up the creek. Fortunately, I have been able to be in some churches where that's not the case. Certainly not the case in the Methodist church. They're certainly not going to start making fun of anybody for having a lisp, or maybe walking feminine, or maybe being interested in crochet. No. It's one thing I appreciate about my husband's Methodist church when he drug me to it. They say open hands, open hearts. and they accept everybody. So that I like. I didn't like some of the people from the traditional service who had closed hands, closed minds. But that is neither here nor there, and that had more to do with how they all acted after service and all the extreme gossip I saw going on there too. And it goes on just about every church, unfortunately, there's going to be gossip. So let me suggest this. If you're having one of those times where everybody's opposing you over something like this, or anything actually, you don't have to react. You don't have to retaliate. You don't have to say or do anything. I've said this before. Sexuality is what sexuality is. And people, their hearts love who they love. And who are we to judge that? You know, Jesus never said anything about gender roles in the Bible ever. It was Paul that came up with those gender roles. So that leads me to conclude it's just not that. It's just not as hard and fast as what they're saying. It just is not. So they're circling their wagons and they're trying to prove how masculine they are, that they don't fantasize about being in bed with some man. And I'm looking at this going, yeah, sis. Okay. Yeah, I believe you. So now I have to transition from that to talking shiza. Mr. Roadhog, please knock it off. You can't even get my name right. And the thing I said this morning about wanting to see you get your mouth washed out with lye soap, that is not a threat. That is not me saying it would happen. I'm an asthmatic. I can barely function in day to day. So I'm not going to show up and do that to you. I'm not even going to pay anybody to show up and do that to you because it's ridiculous. So please stop with all the accusations and the stupidity. In fact, I was actually kind of nice to you a few videos ago where I was talking about what to do about Nat. But you've already fallen in that trap and it's about to play out the worst way possible. You know, I don't like your dirty mouth. I've said that repeatedly. There's no secret there. It is what it is. Find somebody, something else to move on to and do something else. It's just ridiculous. I'm looking at you and I'm looking at all the stuff you're saying and thinking, wow, is this your idea of masculinity, is to yell and holler and call women the C word and worse? If that's the case, then you have just as screwed up ideas about what masculinity is as these guys that I'm talking about here. As Kelvin Gemstone with his God Squad heavy lifter dudes, or as his dad said, and I will never be able to call him anything but this, your little muscle guys. You know, years ago when I was young and foolish and in college, I went out for a while with a bodybuilder. Huge mistake. I learned way more about that culture than I ever wanted to. And it was enough that I quit going out with the guy very quickly because it's a toxic culture, just like a lot of the sports cultures are extremely toxic because they exclude women. They put women in the role of groupies or whatever, and there's no role for women in it whatsoever except for a sexual role. I'm not a big fan of that. I am a big fan of watching the women of Luchador. I've done that a few times, and they can really throw down. Thankfully, their women are taking over and embracing and being able to do a number of sports that were just male until recently. You know, if you want to do it, go for it, is my opinion on that. I'm not a big fan of gender roles. I saw in my old Quiverful church all the harm they do, the number of people that they destroy. And it's just wicked. It's a wicked thing and doesn't need to be a thing. Okay, you guys, I'm not getting any of y'all's chat for some reason, chat is not pulling up for me. It keeps crashing. So I'm going to go ahead and go. I've spoken about all I wanted to do anyway, which was these guys that are so hyper masculine that you wonder about their sexuality and you wonder what the lifetime toll is going to be of this toxic masculinity. If you're constantly having to prove I am masculine, where does that leave you? It leaves you looking silly. And I think it's something that's a big plank in evangelical Christianity. It's right up there with some of the politicized BS we've seen come down, toxic masculinity, the hyper purity thing, and let's blame women for everything. Many of these non-denominational churches are quite unfriendly to women. I mean, even the ones that you would think would be friendly are not necessarily. I certainly had that experience in June when I ran up against the dog, the emotional support animal, and the church told me I could sit outside, but the lady could bring her emotional support animal, even though it was giving me asthma bad enough to send me to the ER. Again, women are devalued. Now, after I started leaving and before Jim left, they did everything in their power to love bomb Jim before this happened, before he actually left. Love bomb him and just demonize me as mentally ill. That is what goes down in a lot of these churches. If you're a woman with a brain and you think it all or you speak it all, they will come after you and they will treat you like this. And I was a member of worship team. I want you to think about that for a minute. And I was actually somebody who had a role there, and I was still treated like that. Anyway, time to go. But this is one of the core problems with non-denominational Christianity is this hyper masculinity that leads to toxic masculinity and ends up hurting women. Have a great day.